This session is on educating a generation of environmentalists. It could and should be a plenary session in this world of ours, and someday we'll get there. Schools of education are faced with teaching about global environmental challenges. The panel will examine the work of TC faculty, students, and alumni to promote environmental sustainability education, or ESE. Specifically, they will present the work of the TC Working Group on ESE, which brings together faculty from across the college, representative of TC's three primary domains: education, health, and psychology. Please join me in welcoming Assistant Principal of Columbia Secondary School, Meredith Hill, who's second in from me. Oh, all right. Executive Director of the Lori M. Tisch Center for Food, Education, and Policy at TC, Pamela, is it pronounced Koch? Cook, Pamela Cook. Assistant Director of Institutional Studies, Jesse Ostrow. TC Student Senate's Green Senator, Olivia Tandon. When I first saw that, I thought, what does that mean? Now I get it. Assistant Professor of Health Education, Sonali Rajan, all right, who will kick things off. So we will have time for Q&A. In the interim, let us learn.
And so I just wanted to give you a very brief overview of the TC ESE working group, just to give you some context for how we've all come together. And then we're each going to take turns speaking a little bit both about research and practice efforts in our relative domains. So the TC Working Group on Environmental and Sustainability Education, which is too long to say, so we just say we're the ESE Working Group, was actually brought together by a faculty in the international department here at TC, Dr. Oren Pismoni-Levy, who couldn't be with us because he's speaking at another conference and is out of town. So we told him we would do our best to represent. But the idea was to bring together those of us doing work on environmental issues, but through various lenses and perspectives. And so Oren and I actually were on another initiative related to teaching in higher education, and through that initiative realized we were both teaching classes related to environmental health and sustainability, and so we said, well, how is that possible? And we don't know about each other's work, and so then we were talking with Pam, and so this group was formed, and through the support of a Provost Investment Fund grant that we were awarded a couple years ago, we've been able to really do a lot of exciting and interesting initiatives over the past couple of years. These are the faculty members that comprise the core ESE working group team, and you'll see that social studies, nutrition, technology, international and comparative education, health education, and science education are all represented. So we really feel that this is a very interdisciplinary effort. One of the big things we've done is to reconceptualize how we think about environmental and sustainability education. And so those, like a couple of students in this room right now who have taken my environmental health class know that we do talk about issues around water pollution and air pollution, and those are environmental issues that we might traditionally think of. But the way we have actually come together to reconceptualize this definition is to actually think about ESE as it looks at the interactions between environmental, social, health, economic, and social justice issues that together promote the long-term health and well-being of complex living systems. And so you're going to hear more about this today, but we are thinking through and sort of re-energizing the term environment and how it links back to education. Sustainable development, we just love this quote I just wanted to frame for everyone. Sustainable development, which is the other side of environmental education, and that will also come up today, really refers to the development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And so I just really love that concept. I think it sort of frames the idea of sustainability in a workable way. I thought this was really interesting. So Teachers College actually administered a survey to its students in the fall of 2016, and we just wanted to highlight a couple of really interesting things. So some people might say, what are we doing talking about environment in a school of education? And it turns out a lot of students here at TC really care about these issues. So 2 findings we wanted to highlight. First is that 2/3 of TC students know the definition of sustainable development, which is not surprising. There's a lot of variation in topic with regard to students' interests. So one of the things we are hoping that comes out of our effort is to develop a set of core courses that students can come to TC and take as a cluster of courses to gain some sort of concentration expertise. And so one of the things that we realized through the survey is that students really do have a variety of interests with regard to environmental issues. So that was really illuminating for us. And then also, that being said, students are particularly interested in issues of climate change. And so I just have here, it's hard to see, I realize, but basically you can see most students who took this understand what sustainable development is, and that there's a lot, that blue bar are students who are very interested in specific environmental health issues, and the topic that seemed to really resonate most, although not significantly more so, but certainly most, was that of climate change. But other issues of wellness, conservation of natural resources, environmental health, and ecology all came up. So this is, I'm just going to stop there, and I'll let Dr. Pam Cook, I just did that too, take the lead here, and we look forward to an interesting panel with you.
Thank you, Sonali. And actually, Sonali and I are both proud to be Teachers College alumni and also to get to work here. I'm just going to move my feet over. Okay, so first of all, I want to show you this photo. This photo is actually, that is what's now Zankel Hall, or was Main Hall. And so when Teachers College started, there was an enormous garden. That garden is where Grace Dodge Hall, the whole huge courtyard, and Russell Hall, the library, all were. It was an absolutely enormous garden. Obviously, that rock had to be chiseled down in order to make the library, which is kind of cool to see as well. And then another photo of the garden. So this is some children working in the garden, and what we always love about looking at this photo is clearly they were told, this is when photography was new, to dress up in their best clothes, and here they are holding hose. When you're going to see Meredith students gardening in a few minutes, you're going to see they really are getting in the dirt. These kids probably did, but I'm not sure if they were getting in the dirt during that photo. And also, Teachers College, in its early phases, and we still do this today, was really involved in teaching children about cooking and being connected to food. And so this is what's called the Sprier School, and it was an educational school, or a school that Teachers College was involved with, that really was involved in experiential learning. So, yeah, thank you. So, what I want to now go to is more currently, we have a program called Earth Friends that was started in 1978. And actually, it came from the inspiration of somebody named Joan Gussow, who's also an alumni of our program and taught in our program for a long time. She started teaching a course called Nutritional Ecology in 1970 here, to basically make sure people still felt connected to their food as our food supply was just starting to become more and more processed. So this was to have children realize that they could make food choices that were good for themselves and good for the earth by being an earth friend. And so what we do in the Earth Friends program is we teach children about the whole story of food. So from how it is grown, transported, changed, or processed, what resources are used to package our food, where can we buy our food, and how can we get connected to the people that produce our food through where we buy it, cooking and eating our food, and then how we can actually make it into a cycle by such things as composting or recycling or returning bottles, or then having things that actually have to go out of the cycle. So from that, we developed, with myself and Dr. Isabel Contento, along with some other people, developed a curriculum called Linking Food and the Environment. So this is a science education curriculum that teaches children about food, and we were really lucky to get funding from the National Institutes of Health through an award called the Science Education Partnership Award. So what we did is we developed, let me back up a second. We wanted it to be science education, so we have what's called the Quest to Cycle, and I don't have the words on here, but the first is for students to question things. So think about what it is that they think about, what they know, what they want to learn. And then the next one, the little girl with the beaker in her hand, that they experiment to learn more, and then that they search or do research to learn more, and then that they actually think about what they've learned to theorize, which is the boy with his hands up, and then that they actually then apply what they learn to their own life. So that's questioning, experimenting, searching, theorizing, and applying to life. So all of the curriculum go through this cycle as students learn. And so the first module is called Growing Food, and this one explores the question, how does nature provide us with food? And when students come into this, they know something about that, but they don't know a lot. And one of the things that we realized when we started talking to students, particularly students in New York City, but I think this is true in a lot of places, is they kind of had a storybook image of farmers and just thought farmers grow food and then somehow it gets to the store right from the farm and we get it, and didn't really think about what happened in between there. Then we had another one that was called Farm to Table and Beyond. And this was about when we first started interviewing students when we just got this grant, we said, well, what do you think happens between the time it leaves the farm and it gets to the store? Some things might go right from one to the other, but what happens? And they made up stories. Like I had one boy, I asked him, how do you think Fruit Loops get made? Because he said he liked Fruit Loops. He goes, they make some rows. Maybe they put them in something like a dryer to get that food dye to stick on them. And then I guess they stick them in the box and bring them to the store. But they would all said, can I make something up? Can I guess? I really have no idea what happens between there. So this was to try to get the students to understand that. And so that explored the question, what is the system that gets food from farm to table, and how does the system affect the environment? So now I want to just talk about a little bit of qualitative analysis that we did of both of these. So what we did is we had a learning progression for food systems. So basically we want to understand how well they understood the food system. Starting from the left side, did they understand it as isolated parts, more parts, explain the parts, that they got that it was a system, that they could understand relationships, or that they really understood the system as a synthesized whole. And so what we did is we asked them a question, describe all the steps that it would take to get strawberries from a farm in California to strawberry jam in a store in New York City. And so the first child, or one child that we did, here's how he or she answered at first. To deliver the strawberries, you could send it on a boat, plane, or train. So they got isolated parts. They got that you had to get the strawberries here. They might not have understood that there was just land between California and New York and a boat might not work, right? But they got that there was isolated parts. At the end, they understood it to systems relationship. First, by the way, these were students that many of them, English was their second language, and this is exactly how they answered. So first it has to got to a factory to get produced, and then it goes to another factory to get packaged in glass bottles, then it gets sent to stores for people to buy it and eat. So you could see how much better of an understanding this is. Another student started out with a little bit more of an understanding. Farmers have to plant strawberry seeds and let the strawberries grow. Then they smash it and do jam, and then a truck comes and packages them in boxes and takes them to the store. And by the end, this student said, most probably, and I love that beginning, most probably, right? That it still seems a little bit mysterious. Farmers pick the strawberries from plants, they sell it, a person smushes it and all that, they package it and set it on a truck, they store it in a warehouse for 1 or more days, they are set in supermarkets for you to buy and eat. Then we asked another question, advice in healthful eating. If a friend asked you for a piece of advice on healthful eating, what would you say and why? And what I loved about this question is, obviously, these were, by the way, 4th and 5th graders. So they did not come into this knowing nothing about food. They ate every day, right? So they knew a lot about food before this. So really what this was doing is taking what they already knew about food and kind of putting it together with what they learned. So the first student said, you should eat from the food pyramid. This was before, by the way, we went to what's now my plate, so you can be active. So they kind of got it. And then it said, don't eat anything that has been processed a lot and has a lot of chemicals to preserve it. The chemicals may go into your body and make you a little sick and weak, and if you eat too much of these, sick and weak if you eat too much of these kinds of foods. Another student said, try to eat low-fat and less oily foods and drinks, milk, natural pure juice, eat salad, vegetables, and fruit. Don't get sick and not too fat because is bad. In the case of emergency, your body can't take too much running. So clearly show that you might need to use your body for something, right? And then by the end, this student said, organic fruits and vegetables. You should eat mostly plant vegetables like spinach, cilantro, etc. They should drink a lot of water after every meal. They could eat dietetic foods, which we didn't talk about that, so that must have been something that they brought in, right? Most likely because the way all foods would have, most likely because that way all foods would have less chemicals going into their body. Water is because if you drink some beverages with chemicals, your thirst won't stop. So another thing that we did is one of our doctoral students actually looked into gardens in New York City. When she started this project, which was in 2013, there was at that point 300 registered gardens in New York City schools, and out of about 17 or 1,800 schools, that was pretty good. Now it's well over 500 registered gardens, and what she was looking for is gardens that were well integrated into the curriculum of the school. So actually, Meredith's garden was one of the 21 gardens that she looked at. Basically, what she found is that how schools can actually get their gardens really well integrated into what they do is to figure out resources and support, figure out a space for the physical garden and how to actually have a garden that can grow different things, and it could be from very small. She went from gardens that were literally containers hooked onto a chain link fence to $800,000 hydroponic gardens on the roof. So it really could be wide variety of gardens, and you'll hear about Meredith in a few minutes. Then to make sure that the students' experiences that were part of their learning were part of the garden, to having the garden integrated in the whole community. And if you're interested in this, I could give you the link on our website that would give you this whole resource if you work with school gardens. And finally, just to show some, this is Meredith's kids with their chickens that you're going to hear more about in a minute. And then this is part of our Earth Friends program. So this is some kids that were having fun cooking and then just having a lot of fun. So thank you. And now I think I'm going to pass it on to Jessie.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jessie Ostro, and I am a doctoral candidate in the higher post-secondary education program here at Stewart College. And I'm so thrilled to be able to share with you today just a bit of the foundation for my dissertation, which is called Mapping Out Teaching and Learning About Sustainability, Exploring Higher Education's Response to the Sustainability Crisis across coursework. Okay, great, thank you. So I want to first start by talking about one main idea that my dissertation is anchored in, and it's this idea that sustainability knowledge is extremely low amongst American citizens. So this source is a bit outdated, I know, but more recent research reflects this statistic as well, in that 2/3 of Americans fail assessments of their basic environmental knowledge. And not surprisingly, American higher education students follow this trend as well. They lack basic knowledge about the environment, about climate change, but they also lack its connection to broader sustainability concepts. And this is extremely problematic because low knowledge has been correlated with poor attitudes, negative values, and lack of participation, both publicly and privately, in sustainable behaviors. And the second idea that I anchor my dissertation in is the sort of civic mission of American higher education, or this idea that American higher education has been and continues to be understood as an incubator for educating students for active democratic participation that improves society. And I suggest that, in particular, the heart of educating students for participation in society takes place in the classroom, where faculty members and instructors can facilitate learning that develops students' knowledge, cultivates practical skills, and strengthens their social responsibility. So it's these formal classroom learning experiences that provide higher education with the pathway to be a powerful source in driving society towards social change, here becoming more sustainable. Great. So thus far, I've sort of introduced these two main ideas, one being that higher education can serve as a mechanism to drive society towards social change, and this other idea that our society right now is in much need of becoming more sustainably engaged. So it's at the intersection of these two topics that my dissertation sort of comes to play, in that I say that that higher education might be a site where we can sort of develop this more sustainably engaged future of our world. Now, if we look just at a brief history of higher education, this really is not an entirely new phenomenon, because higher education has taken an active role in educating students, empowering students to have a voice in the past with many other crises that we have endured, such, for example, the civil rights movement, the HIV/AIDS epidemic, and so forth. So today, we're facing a different crisis, one that stems arguably from climate change, pollution, but has broader both social and economic implications. And therefore, higher education might be a site where we can start to push some social change and make sort of a better future. I just want to make a note that this area of teaching students about sustainability has largely been neglected in the literature. In particular, in instances where it is not isolated specifically in science or geography classes. So what I'm really interested is teaching students across their coursework, in their disciplinary courses for their major, so that it's not just isolated in a science classroom, but where they learn to meaningfully link what they're learning about their future careers so that they can think sustainably in their future careers, or in their general education classes. So as they're learning how to engage broadly as a citizen of the world, thinking about sustainable behaviors in that way. So while it's very important to keep sustainability and environmental topics in science classrooms to provide students with that scientific grounding and understanding, I don't think it can just be isolated there, but we need to integrate it more broadly across the curriculum. So that leads to my research questions. The first research question is, to what extent, if at all, does higher education coursework provide students with the opportunity to learn about sustainability? So in this question, I really want to just map out where this is even happening across the higher education curriculum, the quantity and the presence of it. So where are students having the opportunity to have access to this subject matter? The second question, for students who have the opportunity to learn about sustainability, to what extent do they experience promising practices of teaching and learning about sustainability? So of the students who have access to this subject matter in the classroom, how are they being taught? Are they being taught well? Is it just being sort of dropped in there? Or what kinds of teaching practices are we using? Are we tapping students' prior knowledge? Are we letting them sort of encounter dissonance between these new ideas and some of these preconceived ideas they came into the classroom with? Or looking at some of the specific education for sustainability literature, are we connecting it with their actual environment, their presence right here and now, or is it more of this distant idea? So how are they learning about sustainability? And the last question, what is the relationship between students who experience promising practices of teaching and learning and sustainability learning outcomes? I can talk lots and lots about the outcomes piece, but a lot of the research says that we can't just look at knowledge as an outcome, because just knowing about this topic is not enough. But it's their behaviors, it's their values, it's their skills that they learn that are also important to measure. So the framework that I use for sustainability learning outcomes will measure students' knowledge, skills, values, and behaviors. Great, so I can just skip over this. This is just a list of the particular frameworks. And for the research design, I'll be doing a pre and post test. So at the beginning of the semester, measuring students on this framework, and then again at the end of the semester. Also at the end of the semester, I'll be figuring out if they had access, so the opportunity to learn piece, and if so, what kinds of teaching practices they experienced, to see if there is any correlation between the teaching practices and the learning outcomes. And I'll also be doing some syllabus analysis as more insight into the teaching practices that they experienced. And for the findings, I hope you'll come back next year after I have done this study, and I look forward to sharing them with you and with the broader educational community, because I think this is such important work, and I'm excited to see the rest of the panel and this topic of sustainability and environmentalism further integrate throughout our classrooms, both in K-12 and higher education. So thank you.
Hi, so my name is Meredith Hill, as mentioned earlier, and I am an assistant principal at Columbia Secondary School for Math, Science, and Engineering, which is actually right up the street on 123rd Street. And my own background that got me here both includes a lot of time spent at TC, as well as a background in actually English education, theater, dance, basically everything that doesn't strike you on first sight as being linked to ecological understanding or sort of this topic at all. And when I started teaching here in New York City, I was in the city after being an undergraduate student here, and jumped into a school that had a significant focus on hands-on project-based learning. And I was really excited to get involved in that, really excited to be at a school where a social justice mindset is a big part of how we educate. And I hadn't really realized how critical my own background in growing up in a rural city, a rural part of a city in northeastern Massachusetts, had sort of shaped my own understanding of the ecological world. And as a first-year teacher, I took a group of students outside to Morningside Park, just on a really beautiful fall day, and instructed them to sit down in a circle, and we'd proceed from there. And the kids went completely crazy. For two key reasons. One, they didn't want to get dirty, and two, they did not want a bug to touch them. And both of these facts kind of struck me as like, whoa, wait, what? Because my own upbringing involved lots of getting dirty and lots of being touched by bugs. And both of those things sort of led me, in my own kind of unconscious understanding of my world, to really care about an ecological perspective and what that meant. And so, long story short, that led to lots of work with agriculture, actually, and gardening. And first starting with playing with a little rooftop garden at our school, and ultimately expanding to a school community garden, which is right across the street from here on Amsterdam, between 118th Street and 119th Streets. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the garden, and hopefully that will fill in some of the pieces along the way, but really just wanted to highlight that sort of the ecological deficit, we might say, that some of my colleagues are speaking about is really real and really there. And so how we educate young people to be leaders in our world, and particularly my school being a math, science, and engineering school, it struck me as especially important that the math, science, engineering leaders of the future also understand how the environment works. And actually, looking back at one of the earlier slides, thinking that ecology was sort of the least interest amongst TC interest levels, I'd argue that ecology should perhaps take the center space, in that in order to understand how to situate any profession, be it math, science, engineering, or really anything within a sustainable worldview, requires understanding ecology. So after gardening on the roof, and our rooftop garden was closed due to safety regulations, we ended up searching for a place to plant. And again, right across the street from Teachers College, we found what at the time, about 7 years ago, was a vacant lot, and it was totally overgrown. And so a year worth, or I guess 8 years ago, a year worth of writing letters to the city and trying to get meetings, and this was sort of at the beginning of the, as Pam mentioned, ever-growing school garden movement, we ultimately were able to adopt the site as a school community garden. And what happened here is sort of, I guess, a qualitative research piece, perhaps, looking at what is the effect of these experiences for young people, particularly in urban environments. So the way we approached gardening became a sort of all hands on deck. And that meant my students in the larger picture, those are both 7th graders who learned in their engineering class how to use power tools, which is perhaps one of the most empowering experiences, funny enough, because what they did is they learned how to do it once. They learned how to build a raised bed, and then were completely convinced that they could build the next 2 by themselves. And so for almost an entire school year straight, a group of 7th graders spent their afternoons on Fridays in the garden building 2 more raised beds, and they would constantly shoo me away and say, "We've got this, we know exactly what we're doing." And lo and behold, they were able to build 3 of our raised beds essentially by themselves. And fast forward ahead, our garden projects have grown to include chicken coops and a pretty extensive garden-based engineering infrastructure. Here you can see some of the kids in our actually early years of gardening. And it's funny to present on this and look at my students, because almost all the kids in the past 2 slides are now either in college or on their way there. And something that we really stress at our school garden is listening to the environment and what that means. So here, these 3 are putting in some plants, but I think there's something kind of telling, and that this photo really captures, just that when young people are given the opportunity to engage with the natural world, they will do that listening. They don't have to be told sort of how everything works, or they don't have to be lectured to listen. They simply are intrigued enough and often at peace enough with the world in a garden to really pause and be mindful. Some qualities that I think in education today are especially on the forefront, coming back because we realize that students so very much need those opportunities. And our garden, by virtue of needing to work together, teaches students, I think, to work together. And so something that we've learned in the course of our time building a garden is that there are lessons that come out of this work that are not necessarily intentional. There are lessons that by virtue of doing the work, kids need to engage in. So I have colleagues who spend lots of time trying to plan advisory lessons around teamwork, and I'm constantly arguing if you just took the group of kids outside to the garden, they would be working as a team. And I think that that's something that's pretty magical about sustainability-based education. That's just a picture of our garden, the same view from the first slide of starting from scratch in a tall, weedy, crazy place to what our garden generally looks like in an early spring growing season. And now going sort of back to what Pam is talking about, that it is not just about educating young people by putting them in a science class or understanding kind of an ecology perspective. It's about connecting this work to students' own lives. And to me, a huge component of that is connecting students to food, and food as a source of energy and food as a key component of their lives. And so something that's critical to us in our garden organization and in facilitating garden work is that students actually consume and use the produce that they're planting. So in both of these photos, that's exactly what students are doing, both outside, actually in the garden, one of our favorite ways to cook, and one with a parent who was a holistic health professional, and another just with me in an after-school elective. But when students can taste the food that they have grown, it often changes mindsets. So I've had so many parents come to me and say, my kid would not touch anything green, and now they're asking for Swiss chard. What on earth are you guys doing? And that's really what we're doing, is we're just exposing them to it. There's no kind of specific science behind what we're doing except experiencing growing something that you produce, cooking it, and eating it. I'll go quickly. Okay, so part of our garden model is to really model our space on an ecological system. I could go on and on about this, but the point being that in an ecologically sustainable system, aka an ecosystem, there are certain principles at play that really allow that space to function sustainably without added impact from the outside world. And something we introduced to our garden to allow that to happen were living animals. We have lots of living organisms without our chickens, but living animals are chickens who both bring us eggs, as you can see, but also bring us fertilizer in the form of chicken waste, and bring us lessons like student responsibility and student environmental stewardship in ways that have actually completely transformed our garden crowd, in that once kids realize that chicken selfies are a totally cool thing to do, they all flock to the garden, and then they're eventually like, oh, I should garden here too. But that's the chickens. And then how do you engage the kids, again, beyond those students who are sort of naturally interested? You bring the food to them. And we do a series of garden to cafe harvest days where students harvest the food that they grow, bring it to our super psyched cafeteria staff, and then they serve it on our salad bar. It's changed year to year as to how we can present it based on USDA regulations. But we have an incredibly dedicated master of the salad bar who is always willing to take whatever the kids have picked and make something out of it for them to eat. So that's been a really exciting way that we engage our students. They'll often say, oh, that's really cool, I should come to the garden. Again, there's the salad bar. And you can see sometimes the food, the yellow tomatoes in the middle are from our garden. And sometimes kids are not necessarily, if you picture those missing, it's a pretty bland salad bar. And so they get really excited when there's something new and interesting, especially that they grew. And then the final kind of component of educating sustainability-minded students, I think, is hugely in the form of understanding that ecosystems work in cycles, and that a straight line ending in waste is not a sustainable system. And so from our very beginning, in fact, before we had a garden, we had lots of worm bins and compost setups. And that's become something that's really a cornerstone of our work, is how do we not only honor our food and our sources of energy, but also how we give back energy to the environment. So in these photos, you can see in our early days, we would send students table to table to collect food waste and compost it on site at our garden. We were composting about 75% of cafeteria waste on site in our school garden, which was huge and involved lots of wheelbarrows of food scraps. And we've since been adopted by a DSNY pilot to have our compost curbside picked up, which happens in a couple of schools in this area, and has, again, really transformed how we educate students. Hopefully, these kids will go on to, in their own lives, see, hey, there's not any compost here, maybe I should start one. And a number of our kids who are now in college have come back and said, I'm on the environmental committee at my school, or I live in the environmental dorm. Or just, I've gotten my family to freeze their food waste and bring it to school. So that's part of sort of what makes our whole project work, is getting people to see not just how it happens on our site, but how you can do this in your life beyond. There's one more, I think. Some on-site compost, and I stress that often to my students as the best part of gardening, and I think a lot of them would agree. And actually, the photo in the center, one of the kids recently Instagrammed on our garden Instagram, and one of the PE teachers at the school replied and wrote, "Ew," in response to the post, and the kid responded back and wrote, "What are you talking about? So cute," to the worms. So I love that that's become their take, is that this is something really powerful and really important in their lives at school and in their connections to the community. So I'm going to end it there and pass it on.
So, okay, so thank you. So I'm going to just shift our gears ever so slightly and talk about school climate in the context of other health issues. And I'm going to use violence in schools as sort of my case study example today, but just another way of thinking about how we think about environment and how that links to the school. So reconceptualizing environment to include school climate implications for K-12 schools. So currently, K-12 schools in New York City operationalize environment pretty much in these two ways. So we have sustainability goals with regard to waste management and recycling, energy conservation, water consumption, all of those types of things, green curricula, as you've heard a little bit about, and then facilities and structural issues, so heat and air conditioning, ventilation, all of these solar panels, all of these types of things. And there's some overlap, obviously, between sustainability and facilities issues here, but this is currently, when we think about environment, this is what comes to mind. And so while the physical environment of a school and its classrooms are obviously so important, there are other elements of a school climate which acknowledge the social and emotional aspects of learning and child development that also, this is also based on my research, so I'm completely biased on this, but must also be integrated into conversations and efforts on a school's physical environment. And so a significant and growing body of research has actually confirmed the relationship between a positive school climate and improved mental and emotional well-being among youth, and reduction in various risk behaviors and all sorts of positive health outcomes. And so when we think about the quality of a school climate, we really, if we're thinking about fostering youth well-being, we have to think about all sorts of issues here. And so what do we mean when we say school climate? And so by definition, the National School Climate Council has said that school climate refers to the norms and the values and expectations that support people feeling socially, emotionally, and physically safe. There's actually no agreed upon set of norms that operationalize what we mean by positive school climate, but these are just some of the examples that could range from positive student-teacher relationships, students who feel connected and included in their school environment. For example, schools who have sort of a rule that in the lunchroom, no one sits by themselves. It's a small thing, but it matters, right? It makes a difference. Students who just generally feel socially supported by their peers. These are all indicators of a positive school climate. And so a poor school climate can perpetuate serious health and social issues and increase the likelihood of a range of poor health and academic outcomes. And so this has been well established in the literature, and it's something that as those of us who work in school really want to make an effort, both in research and practice efforts to facilitate. And so I spent a lot of time studying issues of aggression and violence in K through 12 schools. And so I'm going to use that as my little example here today. This is very obvious probably for most of us here, and those of you who work in the school system, this isn't surprising that if youth feel unsafe or threatened or uncomfortable, their ability to focus and perform in a school environment is obviously drastically reduced. And so there's a little bit of a feedback mechanism. If you feel unsafe, you might be then more likely to engage in aggressive behaviors, and that sort of perpetuates a little bit of a never-ending cycle. And so it's funny, I had this slide like from this value several months ago, and I copied and pasted that top bullet without updating it. That number is actually up to 117. So there are, so with regard to gun violence in particular, which is an area that I spent quite a bit of time looking at, just within the past 3 years alone, there have been 117 school shootings in K through 12 schools. That doesn't include colleges, that doesn't include preschools, and yes, there have been shootings in the United States in preschools. So with regard to school climate, if you think about this, kids 5 to 7%, 5 to 6% roughly of high school age students bringing a gun to school regularly, 4 to 7% roughly of youth carrying a weapon of any sort to school. That could include a gun, that could include another type of a weapon. These are indicators of a poor school climate, right? These are, this lends itself to saying what's happening in the school environment, that as a ninth grader, I feel like I need to bring a weapon to school. There is something there that isn't right. And so a lot of the work that I do is to try and understand what are those environmental indicators. Interestingly, schools' responses to school shootings, and a lot of this has been in the news, there's a lot of media attention around this, have been to focus on reactive strategies. So I think of these as things as how do we react to the possibility of a school shooting or a possibility of any sort of violence in a school setting. And so security cameras, metal detectors, locker person searches, armed guards, these are all what we call reactive strategies. And these all contribute to the quality of the school climate or the type of school climate, right? So these type of measures have actually been shown in the literature to weaken rather than improve the school environment. And that kind of relationship is exacerbated in low-income schools. And so you see these problems not getting any better. My general takeaway is always that conversations around a physical environment have to take place in conjunction with these conversations around social and other types of environmental issues. And so a lot of the work that myself and other colleagues have been proposing is to think about school environment by utilizing alternative strategies. And so instead of having an armed guard, instead let's focus our efforts on implementing and evaluating school-based preventive efforts that focus on the promotion of youth well-being, reduce the early antecedents of violence. So before someone brings a gun to school, there are a whole lot of things happening in their life that lead them up to that point. We need, as a school community, to be able to understand and address those issues earlier on. Cultivate an environment of nonviolence by focusing on those positive school climate indicators that I had talked about a little bit before. Reduce the use of those criminalizing strategies. So the more we sort of over-police youth, there's some really wonderful literature by faculty here at TC and at other places that have really talked about how we need to let adolescent youth in particular that the over-policing of them really leads to these more criminalized sort of reactions to that. And so we need to take that into consideration. And then just to actually what I love about sort of tying this, it all comes full circle. There's a lot of work that has shown that the presence of green spaces, school gardens, parks, all of that actually is directly correlated with reductions in violence in a school or community. And so when you have those green spaces, I think Meredith made a beautiful point. She said sometimes the kids feel at peace, like just being in that space. if we don't have those spaces for them to have that moment of calm and quiet and just being, then we're not going to help them feel or maybe cope with other things that are going on in their lives. Sort of the general conclusions is that educators, researchers, policymakers together need to support practices that collectively improve a school environment and need to think about environment in this more reconceptualized way. Current environmental and sustainability issues and conversations that are happening about K through 12 school environments are happening separately from these other conversations, and so there needs to be a little bit more of an integration there. And then our understanding of and discourse around school environment must encompass, of course, these three components that I've been talking about. Okay, all you.
Right.
Thank you.
So I'm Olivia Tandon. As mentioned before, I'm the Go Green Senator here at TC. But prior to coming to TC, I was the Sustainability Coordinator at Poly Prep in Brooklyn. And I'm graduating, and next year will be the Sustainability Coordinator at the Pingry School in New Jersey. So I'm going to kind of go sequentially and talk about what I was doing, what I've been doing here, and then what I hope to do in the future. So kind of to tie into what everybody has been saying, my kind of philosophy of sustainability is that sustainability efforts within a school should be student-focused, and I think you've heard a lot of that today, that it needs to be student-driven. Students need to be the ones who are driving these changes. And when I get to talking about Poly Prep, you'll understand like kind of where that comes from. And then sustainability to me incorporates not just one particular thing, like a school garden, but also the buildings, the energy we're using, food service, as you saw, maintenance of the school, and getting students involved in all of that and infusing it across the curriculum. So kind of relates to what everybody has been saying. So kind of the opposite of the problem that Meredith was having is at Poly Prep, which is an independent school. They had an alum who donated this $500,000 greenhouse and raised beds to the school. So there's like this overabundance of resources with no tie-in to the curriculum. So kind of the opposite problem of trying to find these green spaces. There were these resources available, but they were not being utilized. And so one of the things that I was brought in to do was to try to actually get that integrated into the curriculum, create a plan for how the students could actually utilize these spaces. And so I'm going to kind of go quickly, but basically, we got students using the greenhouse, using the raised beds, looking at, we had students working with an architect who was a parent on redesigning a green campus, and just integrating that all into what they were already doing in their classes. And I think that's so important, is to have teacher buy-in. It has to relate to what they're already doing in their classes. It can't be a new thing that's kind of being stuck on, and something that teachers now have to incorporate in addition to whatever they were already doing. So working with teachers to make sure that this is enhancing what they're already doing, as opposed to an extra thing they have to think about. We just go back one second. The students replaced, they were very concerned about water bottle usage, plastic water bottles, and so they fundraised, and they were able to purchase these reusable water bottles for every student in the school through plant sales and other fundraising activities that the students did. So that was a totally student-run initiative. Okay, and now at TC, I've been working with facilities here. We have a great system in the dining hall, which if you went to the lunch, you didn't get to see today, but we have separation for trash, recycling, and compost in the dining hall, which is great. Except one of the things that I realized is that our students don't necessarily know which bin things go in. And so I often see people going up to the bins and kind of like paralyzed for a minute because they want to do the right thing and then just put everything in the trash because they're like, I'm not sure and I don't want to mess anything up. We have containers that the food service uses to put the food in, like takeout containers, which are compostable, but most people are not putting them in the compost. They're putting them either in the recycling, which if it has food in it, it can mess up the ability to recycle everything in there, or they're putting them in the trash. And so I've been working with facilities to get this system, which will be reusable plastic takeout containers, where students can put them back into this machine dirty, and they'll be washed by the school and then reused so that we can eliminate those compostable containers, which are mostly ending up in landfill. And I was given authority to say today that this machine is arriving on campus next week. So finally, after this whole year, it's coming. So I'm really excited about that for the TC community. And then just briefly going forward, you can go to the next, yeah. Going forward, I'll be working at the Pingry School, which has a 180-acre campus. About 40 acres of it is currently in a farm assessment where it's leased to a farmer. And so it's not being, it has to stay in farmland, but he's just growing hay on it, and the students aren't involved at all in learning about the farming process. And so what I'll be doing there is actually helping them build an educational farm, including chickens, bees, and vegetable gardens as well, and then looking for ways to incorporate that into the curriculum that they already have there. So,
I would first like to say thank you so much for coming here today and talking to us. And I have a question directed to Ms. Hill. What were some of the challenges that you faced when you were trying to implement these changes at your school?
Good question. So I would say there are a couple. A big one that Olivia highlighted was not a challenge is budget and funding, and really figuring out how to do that. And I think New York City, we are increasingly so very lucky to have, as Pam mentioned, a school garden network. And really with almost no funding, we were able to build that garden. By virtue of working with an organization that started a little bit after we started, or formally after we started our garden, called Grow to Learn, that supports the citywide school garden initiative, as well as just making friends with the parks departments, community members, engaging as many people as we could in the project. I think another challenge is getting enough people to engage. A garden grows at its prime when we are not in school. So the way schools are designed leaves students out in the world at the prime time for harvest. And so engaging our community over the summer, we engage lots of students of Teachers College, Barnard, Columbia, our surrounding community, to help maintain the garden in exchange for learning in and working in the garden. And then the final one I'd say, as three big ones, is teacher buy-in and the curricular infiltration, I guess, that we're talking about that I think is so important. As an English teacher at a school where I luckily had autonomy over my curriculum, I was actually able to rethink my own English curriculum so that all of sixth grade English was focused around food systems and food justice. And so the content that through which students learned sixth grade English approaches was through food systems and food justice. That's not the norm. And there were a lot of teachers who would say, well, that's really cool, but I have Regent standards, or that's really great, but I need these lab hours. And my constant argument still to this day is there's your lab outside, get them going. And so little by little it's happening, but I would say those are our big ones, is really engaging, and the best way to do it is to just get people there. And so often I encourage my kids to invite their teachers. And in the garden, the kids are really the teachers. They learn something, they pass it on. And that's really been what's been the most successful, is when kids say to their teachers, hey, can we go have class in the garden? Suddenly there's social studies lessons happening in the garden, or there's science experiments happening in the garden. And so, kind of engaging the community.
When I worked for the Nature Conservancy, when someone would donate a piece of land, and I was in Rhode Island, so the land was often stunningly beautiful and on the water, we would tell the donor, we will protect that land for you in perpetuity. And at some point, the lawyers called us together and said, you cannot use that phrase any longer because we really can't guarantee protection in perpetuity. And we were all thoughtful and asked why. And the response from the lawyers was, someday this country may have a president who does not believe in preservation and conservation. We now have such a president. And one of my questions, but we're out of time, I would just so love for any of us who could to sit down together and hash out something like that. How do we teach our kids now so that when they are senators and members of the House of Representatives, they don't put up with some of the backward movements that we're experiencing now? And it really should not reflect on our politics. It's what we're talking about is so basic to human life everywhere around the globe. So it is kind of sobering, but I must say you all have been fantastic.
Well, I know we're out of time, but I just want to say one thing to that, which is I think we would probably all agree that I think you value what you know. And so it's really important to get students out there and experiencing these things, because if they don't, especially for urban students, if they don't interact with the environment, if they don't get to know where their food comes from or any of these things, they won't value it. And so they need to have those hands-on experiences to really grow up to value those things. So I think that's really important.
Well, I would say that any students who have had experience with any of you on the panel are lucky students, very lucky students. Thank you all so much for coming, and thank you, panel.